Yeah.
Where do you get one of those?
You got a work firm for 16 years. Must have
So
been
that
like
shirt-
my fifth anniversary. Yeah.
That's a very old shirt.
We are live on LinkedIn.
Okay, we're live on LinkedIn. Welcome, everybody. We've got a fun session planned today, and we'll wait a few minutes to get everyone a chance to join in. Okay, now it's official. We're recording everything from here on out. Okay, and let's see here. Got some folks joining. Barb Harris, welcome. Demetra. Oh, Doug Swafford's here. Doug Swafford, we're glad to have you again. Thanks for being such a great supporter of everything we're doing at Hayako and Credit Today. We really appreciate it. Jean Richter. Oh, Mary Lou Martin is here. Fantastic. Fantastic. And Richard Grande. Fantastic. Glad you guys could make it today. We got a few more minutes before we officially start. We've got a lot of folks that registered today, so we should have a pretty good session. And we've got some. I think I actually calculated we actually have over 125 years worth of credit and collection experience on the call today. If you include all of us, so we've all got an interesting perspective on this topic, and it's changing all the time. And so today we're going to kind of share our thoughts for the credit legends about how to do more with less. And hopefully everyone comes away with some actionable items they can put into play immediately.
Don LaRocca and I have 15 years each. The rest is Bob.
I'm feeling better already. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It's always wonderful to be abused in public.
It's the beard, Bob. It gives you away.
I earned every one of these white hairs. They used to be jet black,
I remember.
and I earned every one of them.
Yeah, I guess, there's so many thoughts around this topic, and, it's like, I don't think we can ever have too many conversations about this because it's just ongoing. And, all the stuff that we thought we learned that we were able to put into place over the last 10, 20 years, the world has changed. And some of those things are applicable today and some of them are not. And it's always good to kind of do a refresh and talk about what are the new challenges, and do some of these same tools that were around way back when, are they still good tools? Are they still good building blocks? And I think the answer is probably yes. Yeah, we got a few more people coming on. We've just got a few more minutes here before the top of the hour, or actually yeah, we got about 3 more minutes here. We'll let a few more folks log in. And actually, while we're waiting for everyone else to join us today, I just wanted to suggest to those of you who are on the call who've joined us, if you have not yet signed up for your free account on hayako.com, we encourage you to do so. And we also, if you're not aware, Hayako High Radius actually purchased Credit Today about a year or two ago, and we are in the process of migrating all of that information from Credit Today, 20, 30 years worth of phenomenal content onto the Hayako website. And it's now available through the for the community link. So that's one way that the conversation forums can get going, but it's already being integrated into forms, checklists, surveys, you name it. So good stuff out there. Again, if you haven't signed up, we encourage you to do so. And we got a few more folks. Wait a few more minutes. And we try to make these as interactive as we can. We've got a lot of thoughts today that we're going to share with these illustrious gentlemen. And we are, I shouldn't say illustrious, that's not really true. That's fabulous gentlemen, I'll call. Lots of insight here that I think you're going to be glad that you attended today. But if you have a question or a comment, please feel free to throw something in the chat box there. We'll get to your questions and comments as we go through. But we're happy to take your feedback as it comes in. And of course, we'll have some follow-up emails that go out that'll enable you to go right to that community forum. So if you have additional questions, we'll be happy to answer them there as well. And I've also invited, in fact, Mary Lou Martin, who is on the call with us today. Mary Lou is actually an expert in really understanding how employees are motivated. So she's going to be a part of this conversation on our community forum as well. And we'll be pulling her into the mix of sessions that we do on Hayako. And so we're pretty excited to keep kind of expanding our bench of knowledge and fascinating people who have a lot to say and great advice. And it looks like we're at the top of the hour. Looks like we're getting ready to start. Everybody ready? Okay, I'll take that as an affirmative. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Again, my name is Michelle Herman, and I am going to be your moderator today. And we've got a session here today that apparently sparked a lot of interest. We had a lot of folks sign up for this. This is a challenging topic all the time, but it's even more challenging today given the state of the world with the pandemic and all the things that we're still encountering even 2 years into this process. So wanted to just kind of do a pitch for Hayako Credit Today. Again, if you haven't come onto the site, we encourage you to do so. It's the first essentially micro-learning video-based platform for credit and collection professionals. And we've now got an audience of about 18,000 members. We're pulling in tried and true professionals that you know and love. Plus, we're also broadening our bench of folks that know the industry well and are experts in their field. And it's not just videos, it's also assessments, quizzes, certificates of completion. There's a whole host of tools there. And we wanted to show you how to actually participate. So one of the things that has just been launched is really a community forum. On the Hayako platform, it's pretty easy to sign up. You simply click on the community button. Here's the instructions right here. You're going to essentially sign up. You can sign up through LinkedIn or just with your email address. And essentially, once you're signed in, you're good to go, and you'll actually be able to see what's going on. So for today's session, we've actually set up a forum, Ask the Expert. We've got John, Bob, and Dave as our experts. Also, Mary Lou is going to participate in this too, I think. And here's a chance for you to ask some additional questions that maybe don't get answered today. So we would love to have your involvement in that. So I think that Bob, Dave, and John have been very active in the Hayako program. And I want to just say a little bit about these gentlemen. I think that when you look at the experience and the knowledge, just the ability to survive the credit and collections gauntlet over the last 20, 30, maybe even longer years, these folks all have a great perspective. They've been there, they've done that, they've experienced all kinds of havoc. So the world of the pandemic and all these things that are happening today is not necessarily new for them. But we're happy to have John LaRocca. Of course, he spent many years at Hitachi Data Systems, Hewlett Packard, was involved with Bob Schultz at Quote to Cash. Of course, Bob Schultz has done many of our tutorial sessions here on Hayako. Bob is also currently a professor at UCLA Extension, and he teaches 2 courses that are involved in a certificate program, which is the first of its kind in our industry. So we're happy to have him. And of course, Dave Schmidt also has an incredible background, been in this role, been in the world of credit and collections, and even started his career working for Dun & Bradstreet. So we've got a great team today that we think are going to be able to provide some interesting information. And let's get started. You know what, before we actually get into the questions, I wanted to kind of talk about the title of this session. And I'd like to get your gentleman's opinion on just the title. Is it possible to actually do twice the work in half the time? Bob?
I doubt it. I think that that's a wonderful goal. And I think there are definitely ways that you can carve things out of your day that are unnecessary and focus on things that are more necessary, and therefore get more priority things done. And I think that's the key element here to think about.
Good point.
So,
John, I know you have some thoughts on this.
I would say years ago, maybe 30 years ago or longer, you could more readily throw more bodies at the problem. In the last decade, it's become more essential to eliminate non-essential work. So you can get more essential work done by eliminating non-essential tasks. And to do so, you need to get buy-in from your peers and from your management. But the title is misleading, yes.
We're going to do our best to try to give folks some highlights and some tips and tricks and tools, and actually have you come away with some concrete ways to at least try to move towards that. Dave, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm going to disagree with Bob, but I'm also going to agree with him. I don't think if you're doing things just in terms of a personal time management perspective, only, how you reorganize yourself, that you're going to be able to do twice as much work. But I think if you bring automation in with it as well, then you might be able to get twice as much done. And it depends on how you approach it. But there's a lot of opportunity to do more, and it's a lifelong challenge that I've been involved in, and I'm still finding better ways to do things.
Great, fair enough. Well, let's get into the topic of workload management. So this is obviously an issue that hits everyone, right? The Great Resignation, everyone's shorthanded. There's a lot of burnout happening. What are some suggestions on how to deal with this? And we'll start with Bob on this.
yeah, this is a tactical question that takes a strategic answer. And you have to kind of rise above the fray here. Today is extremely difficult. I mean, it's a global orientation. It's real time. People are getting bombarded with emails, meeting requests, assignments, 24/7, no matter where they are on Earth, from all kinds of different sources. So managing your time, I mean, it's incredibly difficult. And I think that's the challenge a lot of people are facing. It's not just that you have a short staff, it's that you're just overburdened and stretched, probably more than ever before. So you have to stop and look, okay, strategically, what is a solution to this to some degree? And there's a number of things. And when we talk about time management, we'll get into some specific tactical things you could do. But the first thing I would do, and I've done this many times in organizations where I was employed and also as a consultant, is to take a look at, okay, what is the width and breadth of what my organization is responsible for? And you really take a look at it, and intuitively you might think but I think it's important to go back through, okay, what are all the activities performed by my department? And if you have a staff, get in a room and just do a data dump on a whiteboard, or if you can do it virtually, do it virtually. But just everything your organization does, let's have a list. It could be clerical, it could be analytical, it could be collection calls, could be anything. Get it all down and then iterate it so that they're kind of grouped into common activities. Then figure out, okay, how much of my time, what percentage of my time as a department am I focusing on these things? And then you set a priority grid and you say, if I don't do this, I'm going to lose my job. If I don't do this over a period of time, it's going to be very concerning. And if I don't do this, who cares? And when you start to look at it in a kind of in a granular way, what you'll find often is that you're spending an inordinate amount of time on things that aren't really a high priority. And so now you can start to strategize. How do I spend more time on those things and less or no time on others? And you can either decide not to do it at all. You can send it to an area where it's more appropriate. So you have a number of choices, but then you begin to create a template for how you organize your department and your own time. And I think when you look at that, and we'll talk about emails and meetings and so on later on in this session, but I think the first thing to do is to stop the carousel, take a look, and really understand, what do I truly have to do? And you may have to negotiate some things with other departments, with your boss, with your staff, but that's a good place to start. And then when you get pushback, there's the magic words, and I think this applies to a lot of things. And I'll be bringing this up as we talk about things like meetings, for example. Why? Why the heck why are we doing this? Why? When does it really have to get done? Who really should be doing it at all? And the magic word for time management, no. And it may sound a little bizarre, but very few people say no for one reason or the other, when really that's the correct response. No, I can't do that because it's not in my wheelhouse. No, I can't do that because I have other priorities. Let's negotiate another time when I can do that for you, whatever it might be. So with that said, I'm sure I'm going to get some feedback from my colleagues who I think, frankly, before I pass the baton here, these are two guys who I consider the highest level professionals in our field that I know. I mean, they're among the best. So we may disagree on some things. They'll have other perspectives, but I'm anxious to hear what you guys have to say. John?
I was going to attack you, Bob, until you threw me that softball at the end.
Why do you think I did it?
Let me speak only from my experience. And when I've been in those types of situations, it's you walk into it, and I think about it as you walk into a new sets of responsibility as a credit leader. When I say credit, I mean collections, cash applications, cash collections forecasting, but I'll use the short-term credit. You sit down with your team. In those first 90 days, you should understand what every person does, where their challenges are, understand their workloads, their workload loadings, so that you can go back to your management, be it the controllership, the treasurer, and have a salient conversation about, we are not staffed appropriately. And in my opening remarks, I alluded to what seems to work in the last dozen years or so of my career. It's figuring out what are the essential things that must be done and eliminating the non-essential things. It's important that we support revenue growth. That's the number one goal of any company. When I started in credit decades ago, that was never the goal of credit. Today, in a Fortune 100 company, supporting revenue growth is part of the responsibility of credit. Not losing money while doing it is also key. And the third thing is passing audits. So getting buy-in from eliminating non-essential tasks, or getting buy-in from management to postpone reviews. Postpone this activity until the short staffing situation is resolved. You may be able to hire replacement people, to use the example of the header of the program, because people are resigning, but you may not be able to get those people in the next 12 months. And you could suspend legitimately and get buy-in from your management and your audit team to suspend certain activities for a period of time and not do them this year and still be audit compliant. It's going and getting permission ahead of time rather than forgiveness afterwards from not getting everything done.
You
Well,
know,
I'm going
another
to
way
agree
to
with
look at,
Bob.
go ahead.
I'm sorry.
I'm sorry, Dave.
Yeah, I'm going to agree with Bob as well. And especially when he says, you know, it's a tactical solution that needs a strategic impetus. And I think what happens to credit managers, and I know this myself from coming into companies that were a mess and needing to get things straightened out, is like your first tendency is just to put your head down and dive in and work on the details, just work harder. But the simple answer is you got to work smarter, and that requires that strategic view. You've got to see the forest for the trees. And too often, I think people don't step back and take that strategic view. So then when you try to work harder, you're working harder on the most important things. It's really fairly straightforward, but it's something that you've got to do, and you got to push back. And one tactic I use, Bob talked about having a meeting with everybody and talking about all the tasks, is I actually used to do a little time study with my staffs when I came into a new organization. And it was something that I had been part of when I wasn't managing the credit department. And it was a 2-week time study, a very simple tick list that they had. And it's amazing what you find out in terms of where time is being spent. And you know, so much time is spent on the unimportant things, not the essential things. And you know, I think back to Robert Covey and the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. We have a tendency to do what's urgent, but what's urgent isn't always important. And we need to identify the things that are important and dedicate the time to get those things done.
If
Yeah,
you
I
look
think
at
that's
it, in-
great point.
If you look at it in terms of how you invest your time, there's a book and it talks about 1410. There's 1410 minutes in a day. And if you think of those, think of them as dollars, you get $1,410 to spend in a given day on something. So what are you going to use those 1,410 minutes doing? I mean, first of all, the thing that's not said in this question is you got to maintain a balance of life. You have to have time to do things that make you healthy and effective and have a balanced life. So when you're so tied up just to get things done, many of which really don't have to be done or done in that moment, you're really hurting yourself, and you're hurting your staff, because how do you lead when you're so ineffective? That's not management. So I would put it, you know, when you're thinking through this and you're prioritizing things and you're looking at how much time you spend on each thing, think about, there's a limited amount of time you can spend in a day. You got to focus it on the priority things. And to John's point, if you can't do it manually, figure out an automated way to do it, or figure out a way to offload it to an outsource, or look at how you're utilizing your third-party collection agencies. Maybe you're wasting a lot of time having your team work on small old balances. You send it to a collection agency. You're only paying them for their contract labor. You only pay them for what they collect. Meanwhile, your staff can focus on priority things. That buys you time. And it makes, you know, how do you do the same things in half the time? Well, you're doing the same things in that example in a lot less time, because you've offloaded it, and you're probably ending up you know, paying less for their commission than you would if you continued to utilize your staff, and they're not going to collect it anyway because they have limited time to really follow up on things. So there's a whole lot that wraps up into this topic of understanding what the department does, prioritizing it, spending your valuable limited time on the priority things, and to John's point, negotiating ways out of deadlines. So I think that's a good starting point. I think we're going to answer this question as we go into the other topics here more thoroughly. Dave, John, do you have any other comments there? Anything we missed?
I think
No.
we can move on, Dave and Bob.
And, I'll just throw out here, we actually did a survey of a whole bunch of credit collection managers about 6-8 years ago in preparation for, actually it was I think it was the Creditscape conference on technology. And one of the questions we asked was, there's all this great technology out there, why aren't you using it? And the overwhelming response we got from credit collection managers was, I don't have time to go research what are the tools available to me. I don't have time. And what they were looking for, sources like NACM, CRF, Hayako, Credit Today, they're looking to us to basically serve up. Here, we've researched a bunch of tools. These are tools or books or worksheets or exercises that we know that we've done, we've used, they're effective. And I think that's the challenge, is that is still in place today, is our audience, they don't have the time to go do this. So with that in mind, kind of on the workload management and the time management, Dave, you do a lot of stuff in technology. Are there any, I guess, what are your top go-to tools that are either free or potentially free, or an introductory, or something that our audience can easily start to adapt without having to get congressional approval at their company?
Well, there's a number of areas that you can work on. One of the areas where a lot of time is spent is on order release. And so for a lot of companies, it's almost like the order queue is open all day long and everybody's constantly checking into it and making sure that the orders go out the door. And there's usually an imperative for doing that. And that is, we want to, the same day an order comes in, we want to be able to ship it, or all orders in before 3 o'clock, we want to make sure they're out the same day, something like that. But the fact of the matter is, you don't need to be constantly checking the order queue. And if you go into the order queue, or have different people go check the order queue at different times of the day, say every 2 hours someone checks it, and someone's responsible for checking it 8 o'clock in the morning, at 10, at noon, at 2, at 4, something like that, you can really save everybody a lot of time, because the order queue becomes an interruption. And the other thing is, a lot of people use the order queue to generate collection follow-up. So they have tight credit limits, so everything hits the order queue, and they have tight parameters on past due, so things will come to the order queue. And so it makes them call the customer at that time to get the order released. And frankly, that should be part of their collection strategy, and they should be contacting the customers on a regular basis. So there's a lot that can be done in terms of the parameters that you set, and that's usually in your ERP system or your accounting system. Make sure you have reasonable parameters set in that you set reasonable credit limits, that you're not constantly checking the order queue. And that sort of leads to other things. And I'll, open this up to the other guys to chime in, but, it's things that create interruptions, things that create bottlenecks. Those are the things you want to address. And we have more and more tools today to help us. Emails has been already mentioned. You don't need to get a collection software system. There's companies out there that use AI and robotic processing automation to answer all your emails. And so you can have someone, for a reasonable amount of money, have all your AR emails come into one location. The machine can read them and say, a lot of them are going to be, we need another invoice copy, we need a shipping document, things like that. And the AI can handle it. It can pull it out of your ERP system and send it back to the customer. Things like that can save a tremendous amount of time. We spend too much time on emails, checking emails constantly. Just like orders, emails should be checked only at certain times. And you need to put some controls on that, because you don't need to answer everything the same minute it's received. What do you guys think?
Dave and Michelle, to Dave's points, they're all excellent. But Michelle, going back to the question you raised about feedback that I don't have time to look for automation. I think this is the maturity of a credit leader, is to sit down with their leadership and negotiate. You may not be able to do it this quarter or even this fiscal year, but you agree to put your head down and just work through it with the concurrence that they will budget resources and time for you in the subsequent quarters or the subsequent fiscal year, so that you have a place to point your team to where they can come up for air. And in the organizations that I've worked in, they're usually multinational organizations, and we can't implement a process for credit or collections or cash applications inconsistent with the total order to cash solution for the company. And we've been blessed with internal IT organizations that are overwhelmed in their asks and their limited resources. But again, it's meeting with those leaderships and getting a stake in the ground for a point in the future where time and money will be allocated to support the needs of your organization. You have to lobby to see where the value is. I've seen organizations spend money on efficientizing their accounts payable before they efficientize their accounts receivable. I've worked in those organizations, and it blows my mind that people would spend money automating paying bills rather than collecting cash. It just seems counterintuitive, but I've actually worked for a multinational that did that. And I won't name which of them because I've worked for 4, but it made me scratch my head. But it's politics, and sometimes you win, sometimes you lose, and sometimes you don't even get to participate because you're not speaking up. You have to have the maturity and personal ethos to stand up and say, you need to pay attention to your leadership.
I think it's a great point. You know, one of the things that I've experienced as kind of an easier way to get access to some of these tools is go to your marketing department, find out what the marketing department already has licenses for. Marketing and sales oftentimes get all the goodies. They get all kinds of really cool tools and oftentimes just one license, one seat for something like Macro Express or Snagit or Trello or some of these things even project management are using. These are maybe easier ways to expand your technology footprint without having to go to the well and ask for something totally brand new and being asked to, you know, do a bake-off and justify the cost. But if it's simply an extra seat, an extra license to what your company is already using, that's an easier way to get some of those tools that can help you with this process.
Yeah, that's
Bob,
a great point, Michelle. You know, some of the other tools you'll see there is most companies have a content management system or document management system these days. You know, so that's something that you can really leverage to a great advantage. Even the CRM systems, you know, you mentioned sales that they might have, you know, one there's a lot of information in there that you would like to see anyway. And but the follow-up capabilities of a CRM system could certainly be used if you don't have your own collection system or a good note-taking system with your ERP.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to make a couple of suggestions that are a little more on terra firma here of what people could do behavioral wise, like immediately. I'll start with a story that I've repeated many times, and the book that Dave referred to, Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. There's a lot of lessons in that book. And one of them is this guy's walking through the forest and he hears this noise. It sounds like a sawing noise. He walks over and there's this poor guy, this lumberjack, and he's got this saw at the base of a tree and he's just sawing and sawing and sawing. He's red-faced, he's sweating, he's huffing and puffing. And the man walks up to him, he observes for a while and he says, geez, you know, I noticed that your saw is rather dull. If you just take a few minutes and sharpen it, then I think you're going to be able to chop that tree down and nothing flat. And the guy looks up at him and says, I don't have time. I don't have time to sharpen my saw. And that's the example that we're talking about. And I pointed out because for anybody listening to this, think about yourself. Is that something you're doing subliminally, that you're just not sharpening your saw because you're just wildly doing what you have to do without stopping and thinking about, is it necessary? Is it the right time, et cetera? And one of the things there's two things I would suggest to people. One is, we all like task lists. Forget about it. Throw those away. Not necessary. Those are silly. What you should do is manage your calendar very proactively. I'm going to allot this amount of time today, tomorrow, next week to do these things. I'm actually going to allow some buffer time. In a previous meeting, John brought up somebody he knows who actually set private time on his calendar. And that's a great thing to do. But you set up how you're going to spend your time on your calendar, and you allow some buffer for urgencies and so on, and you stick to it. And what that does is relieves a lot of stress. It also gets things done. The other thing, and I learned this as a consultant, traveling around doing different projects and so on, you got a lot of things swimming around in your head. Keep a notebook. When you have a thought, write it down, get it out of your head. And then you can look back and you can manage how you react to that in an appropriate time. So those two things, really manage your calendar very effectively, strategically, realistically, and have a place to write notes when a random thought comes into your head. It'll keep you organized. Either of you guys try those things?
Yeah, well, let me add on to what you said there, especially I agree totally on the calendars, and especially if you're a credit manager, so you have your supervisor, you have other people working for you, you can force that on them as well. What I used to do for my staffs is I used to make them have we'd set up uninterrupted calling times, uninterrupted collection periods. So they'd have 3 hours twice a week when all they were to do was to make collection calls. And we had other people covering their phone for them for anything that was incoming then. So they would forward their phone to their coworker who was going to cover for their 3 hours of collection calls, doing other things, and they could just bang away on the phone and make the calls. And the customers were served because someone else took the messages and took care of whatever happened. And it was, as you said, managing the calendar, and that's great stuff. And the other thing is, I loved the analogy from Covey. And when Fred Pomelli, who was the founder of Get Paid, and I wrote Power Collecting Automation for Asset Management, we used that analogy to set it off, because the analogy is absolutely true. You need to sharpen the saw, but then the aspect of automation brings into it, why don't you get rid of the saw and buy a chainsaw? Why don't you automate it? And you can even do even more. And so I think that's, you certainly, if you can't automate, you want to sharpen the saw. And if you can automate, that's going to just put you on a whole different level. And it changes the game completely. And you need to look for those opportunities.
Yeah, the other Covey story that I like to repeat often that sort of relates to this and what we talked about previously is there's a company, they want to build a road through a jungle. So they engage this engineering company and they engage all the construction workers and so on. And they go to work, and the next thing you know, sure enough, boy, they're plowing through the jungle, they're ripping down trees, they're making tremendous progress on this road to go through the jungle. But one of the people is looking at the map and he's wondering, he goes up and he climbs a really high tree, and he realized that they're in the wrong jungle. They're doing a great job, but they're in the wrong jungle. So when you're thinking about how you spend your time and deploy your people, are you in the wrong jungle? Getting back to the previous examples of doing things that really aren't that important and forgetting the things that really are.
And Bob, I might add to your observations, being a little bit lazy as a leader can be a good thing in helping to develop your team. If you don't have enough time to do the tasks that you have, maybe you have too many tasks and they all may need to be done. but take your first line supervisor or your second level manager and delegate more of your responsibility to them incrementally so that you still have control and can supervise their activity, but push down below you into the organization, moving the credit decision, the collections decisions, moving the activity as close to the customer as possible, and empowering, and by empowering, developing future leaders by giving them part of your leadership responsibility and then manage them against the responsibilities you've given them. It frees time for you, it helps develop them, it pushes them to ask you more questions, it improves communication, and it strengthens the future organization.
That's a great point, John. How many organizations have a credit policy and they have a hierarchy of approvals in there and it never changes? Why not? So you have regional credit managers that are only allowed to set credit limits at, say, $25,000, and the credit manager limit is at 100,000, and then it bumps up to the CFO or something. Why not, if you have people that have been doing it for a while, why not raise that limit and give them more responsibility? And that takes away work from you. And it's decisions that over time, you know, that they can make without any problems.
I would tell you that without speaking, I think, out of turn, I don't think I'll offend anyone, but let's find out. In 2014, I was audited by Hitachi Limited out of Tokyo. They came to Santa Clara to audit our credit department. And then they came back a second time a month later to continue the audit. And then they set a meeting up with the then treasurer, who was my boss, and myself. And the treasurer called me into his office, his cubicle, a week before the Japanese executives were returning from Tokyo. And he said, "John, what did you do?" They're coming back again and they want to talk to me. What happened? I said, I have no idea. So Miyawa-san, he was the Japanese executive. Today, I believe he runs global audit for Hitachi Limited. And he would introduce himself and he would say, "You think my name's difficult to pronounce. What does a cat say?" A cat says meow. So my name is Miyawa-san. It doesn't read that way, but just say Miyawa-san and you got my name. And he said to Georgie was the treasurer at the time. He said, "The reason I came back is that you have a process here at Hitachi, then Data Systems, and we were a global credit operation." He said, "In Japan, if we have a $100,000 credit decision, it requires 1 or 2 signatures. If we have a $500,000 credit decision, it requires 3 or 4 credit signatures. And if we have a $1 million credit decision, it requires 6 or 7 decisions. And as the order level goes up, the number of signatures goes up." And he said, "We want to take your process and bring it to Japan because we pushed it down in part because of my laziness, and we delegated responsibility and then audited the works of our teams." And as the meeting ended, the executive, Miyawa-san, said, "I would like to ask a favor. In 2015, we would like to send a senior analyst from Tokyo to be an intern for 1 year in Santa Clara to learn your Hitachi data system process and bring it back to Japan." And I left in October of 2021, but I believe in April of 2022, the 7th or 8th annual intern from Tokyo has arrived in Santa Clara, and they spend a year learning how to delegate responsibility and taking the process back to Japan. So sometimes you do something and it's a good idea and other people recognize it and they support you because of it. But just because you're part of a big corporation, sometimes big corporations are very inefficient, but they want to get better. You can show them the way. You're empowered to speak up and show people the way.
The only
It's a
thing
great
I would
segue
add to this,
question.
John, the only thing I would add to this is there's probably people in the audience that have 1, 2, or 3 direct reports. And I think what you're saying is so spot on in terms of development of people, reducing the level of hands-on interaction with decisions and so on. It definitely is. But if there might be people thinking, wow, who am I going to delegate to? They're so overwhelmed as it is. There's no way. And so I think some of the other things that we're talking about have to be put in place to make sure that they really have the capacity to take on these tasks that we're talking about. And the other thing I've noticed, and this is for managers listening, in my experience, a lot of times when you're a manager and you have a staff, your staff becomes very loyal. They see that you're just working so hard and you got so much stress and there's so many things coming at you that they hide problems from you. Oh, I'll try it. I'll try to, and then it explodes and it's too late. So part of this delegation is to make sure that you retain a really fluid two-way communication so that when they have difficulties, they feel really comfortable telling you before it blows up in everybody's face. But with those things said, I think you're spot on.
Taking that into the concept of meetings and more efficient decision making, what's your experience in really how to accelerate that and reduce the amount of time wasted and frustrating meetings? What have you found that's been effective? Any of you gentlemen?
I have a theory. I call it the theory of meeting avoidance. And to me, that is a fun thing to do because maybe people don't realize that you're doing it so overtly. But I think you have to develop a way of meeting avoidance. And that the first thing, what's the meeting about? Is it organized? Do I have an agenda? Do I really know what's being discussed? I expect that. What's the timing of the meeting? Who's going to be there? Do I really need to be there? Particularly like Zoom meetings, you can get a script. A Zoom meeting, get notes. You don't have to be there necessarily. If you do have to be there, go. But if you don't go and see the minutes. And if you have any comments, then you have an opportunity to interact with people. Maybe to John's point, maybe you don't need to go. Maybe it's better for an employee of yours to attend a meeting and they can tell you what went on. That's a developmental opportunity for them. Gives them some visibility, gives them a chance to learn something, gives them a chance to feed it back to you. And I think that you really have to, be very careful about meetings that you agree to take. And if you're conducting a meeting, the opposite is or the mirror image is true. Only invite people that really need to be there. Have an agenda in advance. Have time slots for your agenda. Begin on time and stop on time, and people will you'll get credibility and people will attend. But there's just too many meetings. And I can tell you, after leaving corporate life, after almost 30 years and going into consulting and going into clients and seeing people run around, with their little notepads and going from meeting to meeting, and realize that I don't have to do that anymore. I can pick and choose what I do. I realize what a waste of time it is. And the other thing is, if you have, might sound funny, but if you have, we're into virtual meetings now, so things are different. But if you are having a meeting in a place, have people stand up. People don't stay in meetings very long when they're standing up. Turn the temperature down in the room. Sounds a little weird, but it works. And then when the meeting time starts, lock the door. I've had meetings where somebody came in late, they're not gonna, forget about it. They'll be on time next time. So I mean, there's all kinds of things you can do to kind of carve out the essential time for meetings and avoid meetings that are unnecessary. Any other tricks of the trade, John, Dave?
Well, that's a good point about, getting the meeting notes. Nowadays, you can get any off the shelf or off the internet AI system. There's a number of them that'll record everything that's said and kick it back to you using natural language processes. And they're, free to virtually inexpensive. And yeah, especially when we're doing so many virtual meetings, even if you have to be there physically, and you're using the note taker, you can be doing other things as well. So you can multitask during them. Yeah, all good stuff. I love the standing up. That's something I used to use myself. And we only need to have a 20-minute meeting. We're going to stand up the whole time, and maybe we'll even get done in 15.
In front of the meeting has to come, what are the goals of the organization? Because you don't just hold a meeting, you hold a meeting for a reason. As long as your organization has shared goals, and I would say no more than 3, at the maximum 4 high-level goals. And the purpose of the meetings of credit organizations that I've participated in are typically around performance against those 3 or 4 high-level goals. And people have delegated responsibility to speak to their responsibilities and their performance against those goals. And the other people in the meeting are there not only to listen, but to comment on what they hear. Am I understanding it correctly? And here's where I can help you based on my experience. Have a plan for your meeting. And you need to have timekeepers for meetings. Very important, but basic quality methodologies to deploy in your meeting strategy and in your planning strategy would be my observation.
Every business decision requires an ROI. So if you take a look at who's in a meeting, what's their average salary, how long are they in that meeting? There's a cost. There's a cost for that meeting. Is there really the value there for that cost? Is there really a return on that time investment and the salary and benefit costs of the people participating? You got to think about that. I see meetings in 4 phases. Preparation, that's the agenda, setting the stage. If it's live, making sure that the facility's okay and any equipment is okay. If it's virtual, does the sound work? All of that. So you've prepared for it with a detailed agenda. You've invited the right people. During the meeting, you've got good facilitation, and like you said, John, and then you are conducting the meeting in an organized way, and you end on time. And then the final step is documenting, so that you have minutes or what was concluded, what are the action items. And I always found it really worthwhile when I was meeting with people and they made commitments, that I copied those commitments onto their senior management. So now they're accountable. So there has to be accountability for the actions that you've defined in a meeting. And that's one way to do it, is to document and distribute what each person's responsible for, and to make sure that those things happen. So it's not just, I got an invitation to a Zoom meeting, I gotta go. There's all these other things to be considered, from my view.
Yeah, I think the preparation is key. So it's if you're leading the meeting, there's a certain amount of preparation that needs to be gone on. If you're attending the meeting, there's also preparation. Is there information or data that you need to bring to the meeting and have it to be up to date to be able to share it with the other people in the meeting? And too often, that's not handled as well as it should be. And frankly, if I was leading a meeting and that was the case, I'd say meeting over, we'll reconvene at a time when we can have all the information that we need, and then we'll deal with it. You know, it's just a waste of time when the people haven't done their preparation for the meeting. You know, reschedule it. And if a subject's taking longer to discuss than you planned, well, when the hour's up or half hour, whatever it happens to be that you set aside, you know, don't barge into other people's times going beyond it. You know, end the meeting and reschedule a follow-up session. It's those simple common sense things that you need to do with meetings. Don't let them drag on. Don't have ineffective meetings, you know, when all the information or all the right people aren't there. You know, just reschedule.
All good points. So let's move on to staff training. This is a hot topic as well. This is a big issue that comes up for people. What are your thoughts on how do you get this done? What are the options that are out there now that are effective in our world? Bob.
Oh, I thought John was going to speak. You know, this is I can obviously give a commercial for Hayako because it is a good resource. I think there's other sources. There's a variety of ways to train your staff. I mean, online training, assigning them, building a developmental action plan so that you've got some, you know, structure to it is certainly a good thing. But let's talk about new employees as an example. I think what you need to do with new employees is orient them to your company. They don't know the inner workings of your company. They may not even be familiar with the products. So I would highly suggest that you take the time to give them a full orientation to, you know, what your company does, what your company is, introduce them to areas that interact with your department, that depend on your department. Have them do a walkthrough, have them maybe spend some time in different areas and shadow people, to whatever you can really afford to do, but to acclimate them to who they are going to work with and what your company does. I've been in clients where I'm talking to a collector who had no idea what their products were. It was just strange, you know. So that's an element of training. Have a mentor in your department that can work with a new individual and give them some help and oversight, and just have some regular touch points to make sure that whatever you've assigned them to do, that they really get it, and that you can help them kind of bootstrap their understanding of what their role is. John, anything else? I'm sure you have some good ideas.
All the things that you spoke of, I agree with, Bob. From my experience, spending time with the individual, talking about the overall mission of the organization. Why do we exist? What's our responsibility? And how do we act and engage to support revenue growth and not losing money doing it? And it's really a conversation that I would have with an individual contributor or a first level supervisor. And I would offer to them the opportunity to question me on where they felt deficient in knowledge. Because at both Hitachi and at Hewlett Packard, when I think about my larger credit responsibilities, we had very detailed training and implementation plans that a collector had that type of resource available to them, that there was a training individual who was dedicated to introducing them to the responsibilities of their job. But for them to understand, to your point, the higher level, why does the company exist? What do they do? What are the products and services they deliver? And how are they important in the overall process? As a young student, I was a musician. And I can remember we would have an annual conductor come in from the Philadelphia Orchestra to spend a day leading our orchestra. And he would say, the bassoons play at this measure. And no one else in the orchestra was playing. And he would be explaining to the bassoonist what their role in the composition was. And no one had done that ever before. They were just playing notes on an instrument, and it was incredibly informative. And what we learned as students, I brought that forward with me from a standpoint of the credit operation, the collector, the cash applier, the person who forecasts cash. How do they play in the orchestra of the corporation? What is the value of their role, and how important are they in the overall performance of the company? And try to explain that to the person. And I would take time to do that. But we had training resources available to us, and it was not learning the rudiments of the job. It wasn't something that I had to deal with on a regular basis myself.
I always like to look at the order to cash process and as a parade. And if you guys remember your cartoons and when the Rocky and Bullwinkle show, at the end of the show, there was always a parade. And yeah, everybody would go marching across the screen. There'd be confetti and everything else flying all over the place. And at the end, the little guy with the mustache would come out and he'd be sweeping everything up. In order to cash is a little bit like that parade. And credit, sales is certainly leading the parade. Credit is up there towards the front. But the collections and the AR cash posting, they're at the back end, and they're cleaning up all the garbage that's left over, after the parade has gone through. They've got to fix all the mistakes. And what I find for new employees, that the hardest thing for them to learn, and the thing that you really need to spend time on, is learning where to find stuff, how to fix the mistakes, how to reconcile the account, how to reconcile the order, how to find all the documentation, shipping, other things like that. And it takes time to learn the business process and to learn where to find things. And you need to spend time working with people on that and acclimating them to the situation. And once you do that, they could become much more effective. And all the things that Bob and John have suggested are true. Mentoring, sitting with them, having them go into customer service or go out on a few sales calls, understanding what the products are. All those things are part of the process. They need to understand the whole process, because there's a good chance a big part of their job is going to be at the end of the process, fixing all the mistakes.
Dave, your point.
There's a management technique that actually Dave and I talked about in a podcast we recorded recently that I think applies here, because it's not just new team members. Maybe you have a team member that's going into a new assignment and they need training, or a transferee into your department, whatever. And I think this applies. It applies to a lot of things. It's got low trust, high trust. Low trust, high trust. So that doesn't mean you think somebody is dishonest versus very honest. It means that when you give them an assignment, you give them something to do, that you don't have a firm trust that on their own, without help, they're going to be able to accomplish it. So when you have a new employee or somebody new in the role, you think of them as kind of a low trust entrant. And when there's variations of this, certainly it's not black and white, but if they're at the low end of the trust spectrum, then how do you deal with them? You deal with them by giving them task oriented assignments, something very specific. Do this by this time frame. And then you check in with them frequently and let them know you can always see me if you have a problem. And I need this done by tomorrow. I'll check in with you tonight. That type of thing. Somebody, as they progress in their role, this is a continuous thing. As they progress, then you can start to give them more general delegation and less frequent touch points. And you bring them up into a fully trained, fully effective state. So I think if you look at it that way, it's kind of how you can measure how you deal with a very new person as they progress.
Great points. Well, we are running up against the top of the hour, and we've only got a couple minutes left. And Dave, we actually had a couple questions. Any folks who are on the call, if you want to put a question in the chat box for the crew, we're happy to answer that. But one of the questions that came in is, Credit Today did a training survey last year, 2021, and it was pretty comprehensive. Is this something that our audience could take advantage of and deploy within their own organization to really better assess what kind of training their people have already and what do they need to, or what do they want going forward?
Yeah, that's a survey. It's a good survey to look at, and to, that it's there, it's been published, the questions are available for you to look at and to use in your own organization. And, you can compare, go through that one by one with your employees. If you have a large number of employees, that's something that you could talk to us about, and we could create an iteration of it so that you could, do it online. So if you've got a small organization, you may want to just, take a look at the write-up on the training surveys and go through the questions that way and see how you compare. If you have a larger organization, that's something that we might be able to give to you, and you can, we'll be glad to collect your data on that and give it back to you, and we'll supplement the data we have that way as well.
Awesome. That's great. So another question that came in is, I guess from each of you, if you would say your top 2 books regarding kind of all the topics that we've talked about today, what would you recommend to the audience if they had limited time? What would be the best books for them to take some time to read? John, why don't you go first?
So on the topic of limited time, there's a very small book, about 40 pages, written by a fellow that I know very well, a fellow named John Leffler, and he ran collection operations for IBM, and in the 90s and early 2000s for Apple Computer on a global basis. And he wrote this book. It's called A Journey to World-Class Team Leadership. And it's readily available, probably on Amazon for $10. The second book, which I picked up a copy today for $4.35, used at a store called Second Sale online, is a book that you have to have more time for. It's called Management by Peter Drucker. It was the Bible at the Hewlett-Packard Company in my 24 years there. And it's management by walking around, and it addresses all of the quality methodologies of a successful organization. You don't have to read the whole book to get value. And you can get a secondhand copy, maybe not for $4.35, but probably for less than $20. Management by Peter Drucker. Thank you, Michelle.
Excellent. Bob, what's your recommendations?
Well, my go-to is The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. He wrote a sequel called The Principle-Centered Leadership. Both of those books are good. There's, parts of it that are very relevant and maintain, they're timeless. There's 2 other books I'd recommend. You can get them on audiobooks, I believe. Getting Things Done, The Art of Stress-Free Productivity by a guy named David Allen. A lot of tips in there, a lot of things to really stretch your mind in terms of time management. And the other one is 15 Secrets People Know About Time Management by a guy named Kevin Cruz. Also extremely thought-provoking in terms of how you're managing your time.
Excellent. Dave, what are your thoughts?
Well, so I'll already put a vote in for the 7 effective. Let me try to say that again. The The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Covey, tremendous book, lots of good ideas in there. I find the urgent versus important matrix extremely useful in terms of looking at things. And it's got other good stuff in there. The Peter Drucker again is useful. I always liked his book Managing for Results, and it has that focus on it. But anything by Drucker's it's worthwhile to read. A time management book I used when I was, some years ago, and it's probably maybe a little dated, but Stephanie Winston was a really good author in terms of time management, good expert, and she had The Organized Executive was a book she had put out. But there's a lot of good time management books out there, and the one sort of the classic time management, and it's very short, is Spencer Johnson. He was an MD. He wrote The 1 Minute Manager, and which is a extremely good book, and you can read through that in about an hour.
So John, I know that price point, it seems very important to you. The other book I was going to suggest is Managing by Walking Around. I once gave my copy I gave to the CEO of a company that I worked for. I've always practiced that. I think you can do it virtually or in person. Incredibly important management technique. And I looked it up, and it's available on Amazon on Kindle for free. So beat that.
That's great to know. That's right. Exactly. Yes, as Robin Walters would say, if it's free, it's for me. Well, we are running up against the time. We've actually gone over by a few minutes already. But one of the things that we actually talked about in preparation for this session is there is an app called Blinkist, which has been around for 10 years. And I just discovered it, and it's something that is very along the lines of the Hayako is how do you get in, get out, get what you need, and not spend a week trying to consume a bunch of these books. And essentially, Blinkist, I'll give it a plug here because it's pretty cool. It's essentially Cliff Notes for business and management books, and it's pretty cheap to sign up. I think it was like $8 a month or something, but they actually have categories that are really related to these topics. And it's literally a 15-minute summary. They break out the key points. You can either listen to it or read it. And there's another couple things that I wanted to mention too. This gal, your nerdy best friend, she was actually, I met her at an NACM event years ago, and she's got literally a whole compilation of what productivity apps, time management apps. A lot of them are free. This particular book, there's like 450 free apps. A lot of these are obviously consumer facing, but a lot of them can be deployed in the business world. So that's kind of cool. And Mary Lou Martin, who I mentioned, was on our call today too. She's actually got some really good tactical tips and tricks for exactly these types of situations. Somebody just asked about how do you have a hard talk with a new member in the credit department to see if they're not fulfilling their role. It's a huge conversation to have, but what we're trying to do is surface up some things that are tactical that you all can actually leverage, certainly at a price point that's reasonable, and help you drill down to find those things. Because we know that that's the big challenge is you all don't have time. And if we can surface up things that help you kind of go through all the busyness and get right to the point, that's really our goal with this. Any other questions or comments? We are about, we're 6 minutes over now. So we're probably need to wrap it up, but any closing comments on this kind of wide ranging topic from any of you gentlemen?
Well, I noticed we have one question we didn't answer that came from the audience, Michelle. It's how can you have a hard talk with a new member on the team if they are not fulfilling their role despite thinking you are giving them the trust and resources to do it? And I think you need to, as John and Bob have both indicated, it needs to be face to face, and it needs to be a negotiation. There needs to be buy-in on their part, and so you need to present them with the facts and in a way that they'll, one by one go through things that they can accept, and then you can hopefully lead them to the conclusions. Guys, what do you think about that?
Blunt, honest, not demeaning, and leave them with a path.
Treat them with respect, but be direct.
Blunt and honest. If you beat around the bush, you're going to have perpetual problems. And the best thing to do is to deal with it quickly. It's good for you, it's good for the individual, and your team will notice.
And one of the participants on the call just sent me a text who I respect and suggest that we do one other thing. Listen to the employee. And I think that's very valuable as well.
Yep.
Hear what they have to say in addition to telling them what you have to say, but hear them. Understand why they are at the place they are at.
You may find out they're a lot smarter than you think you are.
Yeah, that's actually, one of the topics that we had is, where do you start? And I think that, Bob, you mentioned one of the key things is understanding what your senior management wants you to do. What are your goals for the department? How do you fit into the bigger picture? But a really quick way to get an understanding of what are the things that are dragging your employees down and what is sucking up their time is literally to go sit down and ask them, team, what are you saying? They're in the trenches every day. They know what things need to be done. And oftentimes they have solutions ready to roll. So lots of resources to help get through these challenging times.
And I'll just offer this out, Michelle, for the 47 of the 73 original people who are still hanging on, the number goes down every minute that we take, that we didn't plan to take. But if you have questions at no charge, you can reach out to me and I'll be glad to engage with you if it can be at all helpful to you. And if not, I wish you well in any case. Call Bob Schultz, but he charges.
Not really. I only charge you, John.
Yeah, it's a great point. Please, we invite you all to participate in our community forum on the Hayaka website. Connect with us on LinkedIn. Everyone here is here to help, and we're happy to. And we appreciate you joining us today. And again, we can continue that conversation, additional questions, and we'll tee it up for the next time, for the next event.
Hey, thank you, Michelle. Dave,
you.
John,
Thanks, Michelle.
always good. Thank you.
Thanks, gentlemen. Thanks, everyone, for attending. We really appreciate it. And we will hopefully see you on our next event in the next couple of weeks.
So long.